This meeting is being recorded.
All right.
Right.
Haven't done this in a while.
Yeah, man. So, it might be a little bit choppy, but I guess we could just go ahead and talk about some, events that are happening, in politics and social media, um, you know, just in general population as a whole. That's kind of leading up towards, a civil slash race war. Um, you know, just because there's a lot of rhetoric online, there's a lot of different forums, there's a lot of different hate groups, there's a lot of different just organizations and factions, that are participating as accelerationists, in other words. So, that's kind of trying to lead, the country into chaos. So, we talk about that, and I'm going to probably expound on some, um, things that I'm doing to get prepared, and what I think people should do as a whole, and just that's pretty much it. So,
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think anyone can see that there's a noticeable shift in politics recently, and by recent I mean probably like last 5 years. Um, Things have just been getting more and more chaotic. Like the overall rhetoric that you see people use against someone they may disagree with is getting more and more intense and harsh. But what I really want to focus on is the difference in how everything is now after that, after the event where Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Um, Now you see a increase in just hateful rhetoric overall. And you see an increase in political violence, and targeted violence. After Charlie Kirk was killed, there were shootings against ICE agents. Um, you know, a lot of these right wingers now they want retaliatory, strikes on the left because they believe that a left winger killed Charlie Kirk. So now they want retaliatory strikes, on the left. You now start to see some of these hate groups, these white supremacist groups, blame black people for what happened with Charlie Kirk, although black people had nothing to do with it. Um, and so this is something that's is further dividing the country. Uh, you know, and I don't know. I don't really see a way, like a peaceful way out of this, because everyone is so right? No one wants to, sit down and have a conversation, and just settle things with words. So I don't know. How do you feel about that?
do I think it's past the conversation? Absolutely not. But how articulate, how are people good at articulating themselves? In other words, probably not so. Especially when it comes to that topic, um, a lot of it has to do with not only emotions that people feel towards situations that may happen, in the past, um, uh, as well as just their indoctrination and what they personally believe and stuff like that. So you know everybody's ramping up stereotypes, everybody's ramping up racial rhetoric. Um, I heard about today there was like a government group chat or forum, that was, just spewing absolute racial slurs and just, absolute filth, in other words. So, um, you know, so that type of stuff, it exists in our, not only our government, but in everyday lives and people that, that's walking around on the streets and stuff like that, that may, have the ability and the, capacity to commit an atrocity, in other words. So, it's just going to be a bunch of buildup, with, extremists, in the country. And, when it comes to black people, we don't commit any political violence or anything like that. So, it's just mind boggling to me on how, again, black people getting the brunt of the blame as always, in other words. You know, what really disturbs me is that again, if somebody's oppressing you, somebody's kind of creating you as a scapegoat and things like that. My question is why don't we look at taking precautions and actions on actually protecting ourselves. You know what I mean? Create an organization that's going to be there for protection. I'm not out here, advocating for any type of violence at all. But there's every group has an extreme group. Every group has somebody that's ready to pick up arms, except black people. So
Yeah. Um, really what this is that I think what you see with these people who are blaming this on black people is their frustration being let out because when they heard that Charlie Kirk was killed, they were first hoping that it was a black person, but then when they found out it wasn't a black person, they were just hoping, well, maybe it's a non-white person. Period. Then when they found it wasn't a non-white person, they're saying, well, were they at least transgender or something? They found it wasn't even that. They're saying were they at least a liberal? So they just went down the ladder of different groups they hate, and they started with the one they hated. And it wasn't that. So they're just looking. They're just now looking, for someone to blame on because they did it. Right? There's someone just like them. So now they have to look in the mirror and and self reflect. But as to the point on defense of the community, I definitely know what you mean. Like for essentially sitting ducks, who you know can't really do anything right now. I heard recently that ICE agents are, they're just picking up Hispanics. They're deporting them, and apparently the cartel put bounties on ICE agents' heads. And I'm not advocating for anything like that, but I'm just saying, you know, it's just good to know that someone has your back, someone with a bit of power has your back. And black people right now are the only race just really don't have that on any level. So, no.
no, I got you. But again, where's the extreme group for black people? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Um, we're the only group of people that don't have, a group that's, for one, has a political voice, two, any militias or anything like that. So, if a civil war or a race war was to break out, there would be no, formidable militia or, organization that would actually be able to act on violence, in other words. Just because if the nation is leading in that direction, it's leading towards, black people looking like they're going to get eradicated, in other words. So, my whole thing is that, how are we going to protect ourselves as a race? And how are we going to protect our families and our communities and stuff like that? It's my biggest issue, in other words. Just because there's nobody really thinking about it. And of course, my biggest thing is that, when something like this happens, or if there's a shooting, white on black violence, or if there's something um, uh, like racially charged and stuff like that, our first thing to do is march. I don't think we should march anymore, man. I think because what does it really get you? I think that black people need to operate in silence, prepare themselves for war and for battle, in many different facets and ways. But you know, either that or show some type of uh, uh, show some type of force. In other words,
absolutely. Um, that's what has to be done, and I do think just the global black populace is moving towards that direction. Because even just to take it outside of America now, what I'm noticing is that a lot of Africans are rising up against their governments, which are corrupt and just bending over backwards for the West. And when I say rising up, I don't just mean protesting anymore, or or just voting, hoping to vote the person out of office. Like they're conducting coups and kicking, whoever out.
right?
And I think that you're gonna start to see a more militant spirit in Black America because people are starting to realize that this stuff just isn't working. And a lot of it is because right now the elders in the community are from that era. They're from the civil rights era where you basically had to beg white people for something. You had to ask, please, white man, will you allow me to do this? But what you're starting to see is that a lot of elders now are starting to realize that that was foolish, that was wrong. And I think when you start to see that even they're recognizing it, then this is going to start to move the community in a certain direction, where people start to, you know, maybe realize that you have to be more proactive if you want something done to any major effect. You
Right.
know, but marching with signs doesn't do anything because no hate to them. I really have nothing against them, but the NOI, the Nation of Islam, they had a 1 million man march right to DC. That's a million men in one spot. But it's like, what was accomplished from that?
Right. I mean, if I had to really, praise a black organization, it would probably have to be, the NOI. In other words, because at that Million Man March, I would assume that the Fruit of Islam was there too, and those are armed men. You know what I mean? My whole thing is it's time to actually have armed men. You know what I mean? Ready for battle, ready for combat, ready for national fallout. In other words, black people. If there was a race war to happen today, we'd be wiped out. Because we're not ready for you know any type of we don't have any type of resistance in you know ready to go or in play right now, or really ever. You know what I mean? So that's the whole thing. You know what I mean? We're really so focused on our community violence and stuff like that. In the media, that's all they want to talk about is black on black crime and stuff like that. But for one, it only affects a very small portion of people, and two, there hasn't been any political crime committed by a black person. So uh, you know it, it comes a point to where you have to look at these statistics and like figure out where they're getting them from and stuff like that. So if you was to combine political violence, uh, regular street violence, which is a significant amount of white street violence as well, and crime. Then you top that with their skyrocketing amount of pedophilia in their community. Uh, you know, just the acts is just heinous and disgusting. And condemnable. So if there was somebody that needed to take up a time slot on the news, I would say it's white America. Uh, but again, if you look at Nazi Germany, if you look at other times where there was going to be genocide, you have to create that scapegoat. In other words, um, you know, to be able to kind of drag out your plan or start your plan and stuff like that. So that's where I see the country heading, and that's what I see is going on right now.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. I would like to discuss like some things that maybe could be done to prepare for that. Like things that for anyone watching this that they can take the steps in their life to prepare for what is to come.
I'm sure, yeah. I mean, again, for me, my whole thing is the you know just preparing yourself in every aspect. I look at everything with a warrior spirit. Business, protecting your capital, banking, uh, you know, uh, compiling resources, uh, obtaining a plethora of firearms, being proficient with those firearms. Actually taking classes with them, and actually doing some drills and training with those as well. Um, you know, in every aspect of life, you want to make yourself as hard to kill as possible. That's my whole preparation, you know, aspect. I want to be the smartest. I want to be the fastest. I want to be the hardest to kill. And I want to be formidable in every aspect of life. And I think that's what black people need to do. And I think that's if we was to create an organization, that's what it needs to be focused on. Like I said, I personally would not care to see another organization that's out marching in the streets. I'd rather see one operate in silence and get prepared. In other words,
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention is community gardening. If you live in like a black neighborhood or whatever, try to get a community garden set up where you can grow your own food. Because there's not really any black farmers in America. So if a situation like there are some, but the number is decreasing actually. And like large corporations are buying up land that farmers own in general. Because you see a lot like on the media, white farmers are crying now. So I'm thinking if white farmers have it bad, black farmers probably have it even worse. So, be in control of your food supply. Black people tend to live in like very urban areas where you're very reliant on imports for food. Like if you're black and you live in like New York or like Philly or Atlanta, like if there's some sort of societal breakdown, there may be mass starvation in your area. Food can't come in and out. Food trucks can't come in and out. Where you live.
right? Just gonna starve to death. You want a concrete island at that point. So
Yeah. So definitely young community gardening. Um, take like basic first aid classes too. You need to know how to you need to know how to patch wounds, how to heal basic, injuries a person may get. Um, Another thing I'd recommend is learn how to code. The internet will still be up in some places. Society's not going to break down completely. Um, and coding is something that is good to know. Can help you encrypt things. Uh, maybe if you need to transfer, money a certain way, but you don't want it to be traceable, you can create your own money transferring app. So coding is something that I think you should know how to do, or if you don't know how to do it, you should at least get in contact with people that do. Uh, Trying to think, is there anything else?
I think that's some really good points, and that's really good on a grassroots level. To kind of get people prepared and everything. Everybody's talking about buying up stock and buying up this and buying up that. I think that when the shit really actually hits the fan, I think that bullets are going to be currency. Firearms are going to be your biggest asset.
Yeah.
Food, of course. Get as many canned goods as you possibly can, and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Get as many supplies that are not perishable as possible. Um, you know, and so I think that I've heard a couple of different people talk about this as well. I think coming together and kind of stockpiling resources and start compounding. Uh, I think that that's best bet. In other words, because you just don't want to be so spread out from each other. Uh, in these pockets in these cities, and then a lot of black people in rural areas as well. So, uh, you know, I think that black people should come together, compile resources, and compound more as well.
Yeah, and actually, I want to mention something. This is related to the coding, and you said bullets be currency. Learn how to produce bullets. Don't just stockpile them. Also, learn how to make them. Learn how to make gunpowder. Learn basic things about chemistry. Um, get a 3D printer. You may need that. For repairing firearms. Maybe you can't find parts. So, and 3D printers they don't cost that much. I know people typically think they're more expensive than they actually are, but you can get a good one for like $600. You can get a decent one for that price.
Right.
So, get a 3D printer, learn how to use it. Um, secure your own power grid. So get generators, right? And as I said, if you live in the black community, um, you know, try to make sure that that community, while everything's still up and running, it can run on the regular power grid, but try to make sure that you can make your own power grid if in the event that something goes down. So you want to have a multi-link like energy system. So have solar, right? If there's a lake nearby or some sort of river nearby, you know, having some sort of hydropower is good. Um, you know, just anything like that. Learn how to make gasoline. You can make gasoline from plastic.
Right.
So uh, you know, learn about that process. Things
Right.
like that. Because gasoline would be another currency.
Right. Gasoline mechanics. Learn as much as you possibly can about mechanics as well. Uh, and that goes back to the whole thing of just being sharpening every sword that you can possibly sharpen. Education. Uh, you know. Your means of excuse me, your means of receiving capital. What do you do with that capital? Banking. Um, you know, again, being ready for combat. Um, you know, and just all around have all of your resources in order, and have your health and anything, every bucket in order. You want all your buckets to have some type of water in them. Some is going to have more water in it than the other one, but you want to be putting, water in all your buckets, to fill them as much as you possibly can. Just because being well rounded is the absolute best way to, be survival, to have survival, in other words. So, that's what I personally think. Just be as ready as you possibly can. Just because it's looking like it's going to be a nasty fallout. Is it going to happen tomorrow? Maybe not. Um, is it going to happen 5 years from now? But you definitely want to be, ready when something like that, occurs. Like I said, I just think we're the least focused race when it comes to that. Everybody else, they have an organization or, an extremist group that's going to protect them. Black people don't. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, there's some other things I can maybe say. Like, there's the obvious: learn how to hunt. I'm just compiling a list of things. I think I'm gonna make a video like in depth, just on what you should know about these things. But learn how to hunt. Um, Something else I wanted to say. What was it? Oh yeah, like learn about composting, like how to make like soil that isn't fertile, how to make it more fertile.
right,
Like there's various different methods you can use. There's a black earth method, where you take like charcoal and some other things, and you bury it, and you leave it there for a bit. The time it decomposes, it makes the soil like more fertile. Um, there's various different methods you can look at, and also look at where you live, because the soil where you live is maybe different as opposed to like somewhere else. So look at that. Also buy like start stockpiling highway maps. It's like maps which have like a detailed layout of all different roads like in the country. Buy topographic maps. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not too sure if I said the
I
word.
know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it just shows like the elevation and like the just the overall layout where you're at. Because most maps just show everything flat, but you want to know the terrain of the general area that you're at. So you know,
Right.
and
And
also
on a
learn how to
grassroots level, go
what
ahead.
happened.
Go ahead.
I'm
No,
saying
you
it's
go ahead.
also learn how to read maps because most people don't. They may buy a map, but they don't really know how to read it.
Right. I like the offline maps myself. I'm a big on that. Watches that I look at, smart watches I look at. I'm like, hey, I can't buy it if it doesn't have an offline map capability. That's just where I'm at with that. I want it to already be downloaded on the device. In other words, So
No, yeah, absolutely. Um, there's probably some other things I could say. Maybe I think I already mentioned this kind of earlier, but learn basic chemistry. Chemistry is it's the closest thing we have in real life to magic. If you ever watch like Lord of the Rings or whatever, where someone summons something, right? Chemistry is the closest thing to that. Just learn
right,
basic chemistry. Um, it can help you with a lot of different things. You know, uh, I'll say like learn basic like jobs you learn at trade school, like electricians, like you mentioned
Right.
like mechanic, things like that. Because if you come across a car, if you want to salvage parts from it, because maybe you can barter, with it, um, you
Right.
know, things like that.
No,
Uh,
100%. 100%. I mean, if you're in a instance like me, or in a situation like me to where I'm isolating, so there's not any cavalry coming over the hill for me. You know what I mean? So I'm focused on what is the easiest and the most efficient way for me to defend my home. In other words, so I think that that's big. I'm working on my loadout right now. I'm looking to see if I can get everything that I possibly need in it. I'm looking for, getting probably at least two more rifles, some more handguns. Definitely being stockpiling bullets. Looking at armor. You know, looking at deterrence and distracting devices as well. So, I'm really looking at it all, man. Just because if you're in an instance to where, like I said, there's no cavalry coming over the hill for you, you got to be able to stay put and weather the storm where you're at. So that's a big thing that I'm working on right now as well. So,
yeah, and something I want to mention because now we live in the modern era, 2025, is learn about drones, how to use them, how to operate them. Because drones, any conflict you see around the world today, they all involve drones. Like every single conflict, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, every like the wars all throughout Africa, they all involve drones. Drones are important. Learn how to build them because they're not too hard to build, uh, and learn how they work. Too. Learn how to evade drones. Learn, like the different types of drones, how to view things. We have thermal imaging drones. You have, what's it called? Then you have like just drones that just work off like basic cameras, like the camera you see on
right,
your phone. But just learn how to evade drones, how to like hide your body heat from them, because drones are very, very important in modern warfare. So just learn basic methods on how to evade them, how to detect them, just things like that. Maybe how to jam them.
right.
We have 10 minutes left for this meeting.
Okay. I got you. I mean, I think we definitely went over a couple of different topics and stuff like that. That's gonna not only prepare you for war, but I mean, you need to see the steps too. You know what I mean? I think um, there's people out there in general. They're just blind. They just walk around. They get off from their 9 to 5, or they get home from whatever they're doing, and it's just they don't see the signs out there. You know what I mean? And it's not like again, they got people out there that's also trying to accelerate everything. I'm not an accelerationist. I'm a preparationist. You know, I'm sitting somewhere relaxing until chaos happens, and then I got to put my hard hat on and go to work. You know what I mean? Um, but at the end of the day, you got to be able to protect, your tribe, your kingdom, um, no matter who you are. And so I think that everybody deserves that liberty. Um, so like I said, call me crazy, but I'd rather be silent and prepared than rather be out there marching every time atrocity happens. Like, because I mean, we've been doing it for so long, it's not going to change anything, or nothing's going to come from it. You know what I mean? So I think that it's really ready to. I think that we need to be ready to move in silence, operate in silence, and kind of work behind the shadows. You know, to really create something that's going to be formidable. So
Yeah. Um, no, I know what you mean. Uh, I just think that probably one of the most important things I can leave off of this is just learn history. That's something that people may not necessarily think of.
right,
when it comes to preparing for situations like this. But learn history, and I'm really, especially talking to Black people, please learn actual history. Please stop watching those AI videos saying that ancient China was black. Like, please,
Right.
please learn
That's the type of stuff that I absolutely just despise. Like
something.
there's real history out there. You know what I mean? There's real accounts, of black excellence and ancient history and culture and all that stuff. But just everything was black and we were kings and queens and you know what I mean? The whole everything, it's just craziness, man. And a lot of it is just fairy tale, um, instant gratification bullshit, man. You know, that's
I'm not
really
gonna
what it
lie. I watch a lot of them because I find it entertaining. I'm not gonna lie. Like I
I mean,
shouldn't
it's
be.
the worst to watch. You know what I mean?
They are. They are.
And I
They're fun.
mean, some of it, stems from some place. Like most black people don't know. Every black person thinks that slave ships came here, and that was the first time a black person ever set foot on, the land of Americans. That's not true. There's been many different African maritime ships that was doing trade, all over the world. Uh, you know, but for everything to just be black and yeah, this was black and that was black, and it's just too much. You need to really get down to the real meat and potatoes and really get into history books and really study up and understand where you come from, your culture.
Absolutely. And because you said that, I actually want to say that. Oh, sorry, series. I think will boost this channel's popularity. Where I'm going to cover obscure African history topics, just Black history topics. Doesn't have to be necessarily an African. Obscure Black history um, that I doubt anyone's heard of, even if you're very educated on African history.
Right.
So yeah, you have anything else?
No, I think that'll wrap it up, man. I think it's a good
Okay,
video.
all right. Have a
No,
good day.